Arthur Sterling watched with silent, agonizing tears as his young son, Leo, once again refused the food his father offered. The expensive therapies, the renowned specialists, the endless parade of caregivers, none had managed to help his 5-year-old son, who suffered from severe autism, to feed himself or accept food from anyone but a select few. Leo, with his bright, inquisitive eyes, lived in a world of his own, a world that Arthur, despite all his wealth and power, could not penetrate. Arthur, a successful entrepreneur and owner of one of the largest real estate development firms in Los Angeles, was accustomed to control. He built skyscrapers, closed multi-million-dollar deals, and commanded respect with a single glance. But with Leo, he was utterly powerless. Since Leo's diagnosis and the illness that had claimed his wife Eliza 3 years ago, Arthur had retreated into a rigid, solitary routine, dividing his time between his burgeoning business empire and the daunting task of raising a son with whom he could barely communicate. His life was a testament to his ambition, but also a monument to his profound loneliness. They were at the Gilded Spoon, an exclusive high-end restaurant in Beverly Hills, a place Arthur frequented for business lunches. He had brought Leo along today, hoping a change of scenery might spark something, anything, in his son. But Leo, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sounds and smells, had retreated further into himself, rocking gently in his seat, his eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Arthur was about to give up, to call for the check and retreat to the sterile quiet of his mansion, when he noticed a young waitress approaching their table. Her name was Elena. She moved with a quiet grace, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her gentle smile radiating a calm that was almost palpable. She couldn't have been more than 25. She wore the simple uniform of the restaurant, but carried herself with an unassuming dignity. Elena knelt beside Leo's chair, bringing herself to his eye level. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she simply observed him, her gaze soft and patient. Then, with a gentle smile, she began to interact with him in a way that Arthur had never witnessed before. She didn't try to force eye contact or demand a response. She simply hummed a soft, wordless tune, her fingers tracing a gentle pattern on the tablecloth near Leo's hand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Leo's rocking slowed. His eyes, usually distant, flickered towards Elena's hand. Elena continued to hum, her movements fluid and unhurried. Then she picked up a small piece of bread from the basket on the table and, without looking at Leo directly, began to break it into tiny uniform pieces. She placed one piece on the table, then another, creating a small, intricate pattern. Leo's gaze followed her fingers. Elena then picked up a spoon, dipped it into a small bowl of applesauce, and gently placed it near the bread pieces. She didn't offer it to him. She just left it there, humming softly. To Arthur's astonishment, Leo's small hand, usually so resistant to touch, reached out. He picked up the spoon. His fingers, usually clumsy, held it with surprising precision. And then, he brought the spoon to his mouth. Arthur felt his breath catch in his throat. A single tear, unbidden, rolled down his cheek. Leo was eating, by himself, something he hadn't done in months. "How did you do that?" Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes fixed on the almost miraculous scene unfolding before him. "Oh, sir, it's nothing special," Elena replied with a disarming simplicity, her eyes still on Leo, who was now taking another spoonful of applesauce. "My younger brother Alex is also on the spectrum. I've learned a few techniques that work well with him." Arthur observed the young woman intently. She wore no expensive jewelry, no designer clothes, yet she possessed a gift that all his money couldn't buy. "Do you have training in this field?" he questioned, still incredulous. "I started studying psychology in college, but I had to drop out when my grandmother got sick," she explained, gently guiding Leo's hand to help him hold the spoon better. "Now I'm saving money to go back to school." In that moment, Arthur Sterling, known for his coldness in business and his billionaire fortune, felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. Since Leo's diagnosis and the illness that had claimed his wife Eliza 3 years ago, he had been trapped in a rigid, solitary routine, struggling to connect with a son he loved but couldn't reach. "Young lady, what's your full name?" he asked, already pulling out his phone. "Elena Vance," she replied, noticing the shift in his demeanor. "Did something happen?" "Perhaps something very good just happened, Elena," he said, putting his phone away after making a quick note. "You have no idea how much this small moment means to us." The waitress smiled, still not fully comprehending the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. For her, helping the boy was just a natural gesture. For Arthur, it was the first light after years of darkness. That night, in his sprawling mansion in Bel Air, Arthur couldn't get the image of his son eating by himself out of his head. Leo was now sleeping peacefully, a rare occurrence in recent weeks. Arthur sat in his study, a room filled with expensive art and rare books, and began to search on his computer. He needed to know more about the waitress who had achieved in minutes what years of expensive therapies had failed to accomplish. His personal assistant, Mark, knocked on the study door. "Sir, I have the information you requested about the young lady from the restaurant," he said, handing Arthur a folder. Arthur quickly flipped through the contents. Elena Vance, 24 years old, born in a small town in the Midwest, came to Los Angeles at 18 to study psychology. Dropped out in her third year when her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents' early passing, became seriously ill. She had been working at the Gilded Spoon for just over a year. No criminal record, no significant debts, except for partially paid student loans. "Is that all?" Arthur asked, expecting something more revealing. "Well, she's known at the restaurant for her attentive manner with customers. Never had any disciplinary issues," Mark added. "And I found something interesting. She developed her own communication method for autistic children, inspired by her experience with her brother. She even presented a paper on it at college before dropping out." Arthur leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. His instinct as a successful businessman rarely failed him, and something about that waitress had piqued his interest. It wasn't just the fact that she had managed to get Leo to eat by himself, but the naturalness with which she treated him, without the pitying gaze he was so used to receiving. "Mark, I want you to extend an invitation to her to come here as a consultant to help with Leo," he said finally. "Offer her a generous compensation, something she can't refuse." "Are you sure, sir? We barely know her," Mark questioned, always cautious. "I'm sure," Arthur replied, his gaze firm. "Leo connected with her in a way I've never seen before, and I'm willing to try anything to help my son." What Arthur didn't know was that his mother, Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch of the family's financial empire, would not look kindly on a stranger entering their lives, and that Elena carried a more complex past than her profile suggested, a past that made her fear deep involvement and had taught her to keep her distance from powerful people. The next morning, Elena arrived at work as usual, taking 2 buses from her small apartment in a working-class neighborhood to the opulence of Beverly Hills. She was thinking about the little boy she had helped the day before, how he reminded her of her own brother, Alex, who was now 17 and living with an aunt back in their hometown after their grandmother had passed away. "Elena, the manager wants to see you," her co-worker Maria informed her as soon as she walked in, "and it looks serious." With a sigh, Elena headed to Mr. Antonio's office, the restaurant's manager. She knew she had broken protocol by sitting with a customer the day before, but she couldn't bring herself to regret it after seeing the relief on the boy's father's face. "Ms. Vance," Mr. Antonio began, adjusting his glasses, "I received a complaint about your conduct yesterday. The restaurant's policy regarding customer contact is very clear." "I understand, Mr. Antonio, but that little boy was having a crisis." "I'm not finished," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "I also received a phone call from Mr. Arthur Sterling's office this morning. Apparently, he was quite impressed with your service." The manager opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. "He asked me to give this to you. It's an invitation for an interview at his residence," he explained, extending the envelope. "And he made it clear that you are excused from work for as long as necessary to attend this appointment." Elena took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was thick and embossed with a golden emblem bearing the initials A.S. "Who exactly is this customer, Mr. Antonio?" she asked, realizing there was something much bigger happening. "My goodness, girl, you didn't recognize Arthur Sterling?" The manager looked shocked. "He owns the Sterling Group, one of the largest real estate development firms in the country. He's a billionaire, a regular feature in business magazines, and from what I gather, he wants to hire you to help with his son." Elena felt her stomach sink. She always tried to avoid getting too involved with customers, especially the rich and powerful. Her experience had taught her that people with money often thought they could buy anything, including people. "When is this interview?" she asked, still hesitant. "This afternoon. A driver will pick you up at 2 o'clock. the manager replied, now with a calculated smile. This could be very good for the restaurant, Elena. And for you too, obviously. Leaving the manager's office, Elena found all her colleagues staring at her with curiosity. News traveled fast in the restaurant. What was that about, Elena? Maria asked, approaching her. Is it true you're going to work for Arthur Sterling? I don't even know what it's about yet, Elena replied, tucking the envelope into her bag. I just helped a little boy who was having trouble eating. A little boy who happens to be the son of one of the richest men in California, Maria exclaimed. Girl, this is your chance to get out of this place and finally go back to college. Elena just smiled, but her heart was heavy. She wanted to help the boy, but she feared what might happen if she entered the world of that powerful family. The last time she had trusted someone with money and influence, she had almost lost everything, including her dignity. At 2 o'clock sharp, a uniformed driver was waiting for Elena at the restaurant's entrance. The car, a black Mercedes-Benz with tinted windows, drew curious glances from passers-by and her fellow employees, who were peeking discreetly through the restaurant's large windows. Ms. Vance, the driver, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, asked, I'm Paul, Mr. Sterling's driver. I'm here to take you to his residence. Elena nodded, feeling out of place in her waitress uniform. She hadn't had time to go home and change. I'm a bit underdressed for an interview, she commented, gesturing to her uniform. Don't worry about that, miss, Paul replied with a slight smile. Mr. Sterling was very clear that there was no need for formalities. During the drive, Elena watched the city change gradually as they approached the exclusive neighborhood of Bel Air. The streets became wider, the sidewalks more tree-lined, and the buildings gave way to mansions hidden behind high walls and elaborate gates. Is this your first time in Bel Air? Paul asked, noticing her curious gaze. Yes, she replied simply. I've never had a reason to come to this part of the city. Mr. Sterling lives in one of the largest properties in the neighborhood, the driver commented. The main house was designed by his late wife, who was an architect. He's a widower? Elena asked, remembering that she hadn't seen a mother figure with the boy at the restaurant. Yes, Mrs. Eliza passed away 3 years ago, Paul replied, his voice softening. It was a great loss for everyone, especially for little Leo. She fell ill shortly after his diagnosis. Elena felt a pang of compassion. Losing a mother so young, especially for a child with autism who already faced so many challenges in understanding the world, must have been devastating. Finally, the car stopped in front of an imposing gate. After a brief security check, the gates swung open, revealing a long driveway lined with well-manicured trees. At the end of the drive, a contemporary mansion stood impressively, with large glass windows and clean architectural lines. We've arrived, miss, Paul announced, parking the car near the main entrance. Elena got out of the vehicle, feeling minuscule in the face of the place's grandeur. A woman of about 50, dressed in simple but elegant clothes, was waiting at the door. Welcome, Ms. Vance, she said with a warm smile. I'm Regina, the housekeeper. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in his study. Leo is currently in his occupational therapy session. Regina led Elena through an impressive entrance hall with a double-height ceiling and a curved staircase leading to the second floor. The walls displayed works of art that Elena recognized as being by renowned American artists. It's a beautiful house, Elena commented, trying to hide her nervousness. Mrs. Eliza had impeccable taste, Regina replied with a hint of nostalgia. She made a point of showcasing national art in every detail of the decor. When they reached a dark wooden door at the end of a hallway, Regina knocked gently. Mr. Sterling, Ms. Vance is here, she announced. Come in, a deep voice replied from the other side. Regina opened the door and gestured for Elena to enter. The study was a large room with bookshelves covering an entire wall, an imposing desk near windows overlooking a well-tended garden, and a seating area with leather sofas. Arthur Sterling was standing by the window, looking out. When he heard the door close, he turned to face Elena. He was wearing a light blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dark trousers. Without the formal suit from the restaurant, he looked younger and less intimidating, though his posture still radiated authority. Ms. Vance, thank you for coming, he said, approaching to greet her. Please, make yourself comfortable. Elena shook his extended hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Sterling, but I must confess I'm a bit confused about the reason, she replied honestly. Arthur gestured to the sofas, inviting her to sit. I believe you're too modest to understand the impact you had yesterday, he began, sitting on the opposite sofa. "What you did with Leo was extraordinary." "It was just a moment of connection, Mr. Sterling," Elena replied, trying to downplay it. "Children with autism often respond well when they're approached in a way that suits their needs. It may seem simple to you, but for us, it was revolutionary," he said, his gaze intense. "Leo doesn't let anyone get close easily. We have a team of qualified professionals, psychologists, occupational therapists, speech therapists. None of them have managed to establish such an immediate connection as you did." Arthur stood up and walked to his desk, picking up a folder. "I learned that you studied psychology and developed your own communication method for autistic children," he continued, "and that you put your studies on hold to care for your grandmother." Elena felt uncomfortable with the amount of information he had about her. "How did you find all that out?" she asked, trying not to sound accusatory. "I have resources, Ms. Vance," he replied bluntly. "And when it comes to my son's well-being, I don't hesitate to use them." "I understand your concern for your son, Mr. Sterling," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "But I still don't understand what you expect from me." Arthur sat down again, leaning forward slightly. "I want to offer you a job, Ms. Vance, as Leo's therapeutic companion," he said directly, "with a salary 5 times what you currently earn, plus benefits like health insurance, a housing allowance, and, if you wish, funding to complete your studies." Elena blinked, stunned by the proposal. "Mr. Sterling, I don't have the formal qualifications for that," she replied, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "I didn't finish my degree. I don't have certifications." "You have something more valuable, a natural connection with my son," Arthur interrupted, "and practical experience with your brother. The diplomas can come later if you want them. What interests me is the ability you've already demonstrated. I don't know if it would be ethical to accept a position for which I'm not formally qualified," Elena argued, even as her heart raced at the possibility of finally returning to college. Arthur watched her with interest, not used to being turned down. "Your ethical concern is admirable, Ms. Vance," he commented. "But let me clarify. You wouldn't be replacing the professionals who already work with Leo. You would be a complement, someone who could build a bridge between him and the world, and of course, between him and his father." The last sentence was said with a vulnerability that surprised Elena. For a moment, the powerful businessman gave way to a father who simply didn't know how to connect with his own son. "I'd like to get to know Leo better before making any decisions," she said finally. "A few minutes of interaction at a restaurant isn't enough to know if I can really help him consistently." A faint smile appeared on Arthur's face. "That can be arranged," he replied, standing up. "In fact, Leo's occupational therapy session should be ending now. Would you like to join him for his snack? It's usually a challenging time." Elena nodded, following Arthur out of the study. As they walked down the hallway, she noticed more closely the details of the decor. There were family photos. A younger Arthur next to a beautiful woman with brown hair and a luminous smile, presumably Eliza. Photos of a baby Leo, and some of Arthur with an elegant older woman who looked like his mother. They arrived at a large, airy room, clearly adapted to Leo's needs. There were various sensory resources, such as soft lights, different textures on the walls, and furniture suited to a child's size. A young woman was putting away therapeutic materials while Leo sat in a corner, seemingly absorbed in a tablet. "Good afternoon, Dr. Laura," Arthur greeted. "How was the session today?" "Quite productive, Mr. Sterling," the therapist replied with a smile. "We worked on fine motor skills, and Leo showed significant progress." The therapist noticed Elena and gave her a questioning look. "This is Elena Vance," Arthur introduced. "She's a consultant who is helping us with new approaches for Leo." Dr. Laura extended her hand to Elena with a professional smile, but her eyes showed a slight hint of suspicion. "A pleasure to meet you. It's always good to have more people on the support team," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Well, I'm finishing up for today. Leo's snack is prepared on the table as usual." The therapist quickly said her goodbyes and left the room, leaving Arthur, Elena, and Leo alone. The boy remained focused on his tablet, seemingly unaware of their presence. "Leo usually gets absorbed in his educational games," Arthur explained in a low voice. "It's hard to pull him away from that activity to eat." Elena observed the boy for a moment. He had slightly wavy brown hair, expressive eyes, and delicate features. He looked a lot like the woman in the photographs. He was wearing a light blue t-shirt and comfortable cotton pants. "May I approach him?" she asked Arthur. "Of course, but he usually ignores new people," the father warned. Elena approached slowly, sitting on the floor at a respectful distance from Leo. She didn't speak immediately, just watched what he was doing on the tablet. It was a shape and color matching game. "You're very good at this," she commented softly after a few minutes, without looking directly at him. "My brother loves this game too." Leo didn't respond, but his fingers paused briefly on the screen, indicating that he had heard. Elena continued to comment casually on the game, without demanding a response or eye contact. After a few minutes, she noticed that the boy occasionally glanced furtively in her direction. "It's almost snack time, Leo," she said in the same calm tone. "There's carrot cake today. My brother Alex loves carrot cake, especially with chocolate on top." Surprisingly, Leo briefly looked up. Elena smiled but didn't force prolonged eye contact. "When my brother was little, we had a system for eating," she continued, maintaining a conversational tone. "He could choose the order of the food as long as he ate everything by the end. It made him feel like he had control over the situation." Slowly, Elena stood up and walked to the table where the prepared snack was. Carrot cake, some fruit cut into small pieces, and a glass of juice. "Look at that, I guessed right. It really is carrot cake," she commented with gentle enthusiasm. "Leo, would you prefer to start with the cake or the fruit?" To Arthur's surprise, who was watching the scene intently, Leo stood up, put his tablet aside, and walked to the table. He stopped next to Elena and pointed to the cake. "Good choice," she said, pulling out a chair for him. "Let's start with the cake then." Leo sat down and allowed Elena to place a napkin on his lap. When she offered him a piece of cake on a fork, he accepted it, but then quickly took the fork from her hands, preferring to feed himself. Arthur watched the scene with a mixture of astonishment and emotion. Leo's mealtimes were usually exhausting battles, with a lot of resistance, and often ended with little or no food consumed. Seeing his son interacting this way with someone he had just met was almost surreal. "Very good, Leo," Elena praised when he finished the cake, without overdoing the praise, keeping a natural tone. "Now it's time for the fruit. Which one do you want first?" The boy pointed to a piece of melon and again fed himself. When he finished his snack, Leo surprised his father even more by picking up his glass and drinking the juice without spilling, something he usually refused to do without help. "Great job, Leo," Elena said. "You ate everything up." The boy returned to his tablet, but not before giving Elena a quick glance, which for a child with autism represented a significant level of acknowledgement. Arthur approached Elena with an expression that mixed gratitude and awe. "How did you—" he began, but couldn't finish the question. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Mr. Sterling," Elena replied sincerely. "I just respected his time. I offered clear choices and didn't create expectations that could generate anxiety. Our team of specialists has been trying these approaches for years," Arthur said, still impressed. "What do you have that's different?" Elena reflected for a moment before answering. "Maybe it's because I don't see him primarily as a diagnosis or a set of symptoms," she explained. "To me, Leo is a child who perceives the world in a different way, and my job is to try to understand that perception, not impose my own." Arthur nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Ms. Vance, I hope you'll reconsider my offer," he said seriously. "You've just achieved in 15 minutes what we haven't managed in months of intensive therapy." Elena looked at Leo, who seemed comfortable and relaxed after his snack, something Arthur indicated was rare. "I need to think, Mr. Sterling," she replied. "It's an important decision that would affect my life in many ways." "I understand," he said. "May I ask what makes you hesitate? Is the salary not attractive enough?" "It's not a matter of money," Elena explained, choosing her words carefully. "It's about responsibility. Leo needs consistency in his life. I don't want to create bonds that could later be broken and cause more harm than good." What Elena didn't say was that she also feared getting too emotionally involved. After the traumatic experience of losing her grandmother and having to distance herself from her brother, she had built barriers to protect herself. Working so closely with a family, especially with a vulnerable child, meant risking getting hurt again. "If it helps your decision," Arthur said, "I'm willing to offer an initial 3-month contract with the possibility of renewal. That would give us time to evaluate if the partnership works for everyone involved." Elena considered the proposal. A temporary contract seemed more manageable and less threatening. "In that case, I believe we can try," she replied finally. "But on one condition." Arthur raised his eyebrows, not used to receiving conditions from potential employees. "And what would that be?" "I want the autonomy to implement my approach. even if it sometimes disagrees with the current team," Elena stated with confidence. "And I'd like to be able to adjust my schedule to resume my studies if I decide to go back to college." A faint smile appeared on Arthur's face. The young woman had courage, he had to admit. "That seems fair," he agreed, extending his hand. "Do we have a deal then?" Elena shook his hand, sealing the pact that would change both their lives more than either of them could imagine at that moment. "We have a deal, Mr. Sterling." "Arthur, please," he corrected. "If we're going to work together for Leo's well-being, we can dispense with the formalities." At that moment, neither of them noticed they were being watched. From the ajar door of the room, Regina, the housekeeper, had been observing the scene with a worried look. She knew that Elena's arrival would not be well received by everyone in the house, especially by Eleanor Sterling, the family matriarch, who was extremely protective of her grandson and suspicious of strangers. And while Arthur and Elena were discussing the practical details of their agreement on the other side of the city, in the small apartment Elena shared with a roommate, her phone was ringing insistently. It was a call that would bring to light secrets from the past that she had fought so hard to leave behind. Secrets that could compromise her new opportunity before it even began. On the screen of the abandoned cell phone, the name Dr. Evans, St. Jude's Hospital, flashed. 2 weeks passed since Elena accepted the temporary position at the Sterling mansion. Her adaptation was gradual, with Elena visiting the house 3 times a week initially, so as not to cause abrupt changes in Leo's routine. The progress was small, but significant. Leo now recognized her immediately upon her arrival, sometimes even managing a faint smile. Mealtimes became less tense, and Leo began to participate in activities suggested by Elena, such as simple games and sensory exercises she adapted from her experiences with her brother. On a Thursday morning, Elena arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. She had agreed with Arthur to participate in the weekly meeting with Leo's multidisciplinary team to align their approaches. Paul, the driver, was already waiting at the gate, as had become customary. Arthur had insisted on sending the car for her, arguing it would facilitate her logistics and ensure punctuality. "Good morning, Elena." Paul greeted her with his usual gentle smile. "Sleep well?" "Not much," she confessed, getting into the car. "I was studying late. I've decided to try the re-entry selection process for college next semester." "That's great," the driver replied, starting the vehicle. "Mr. Sterling will be pleased to hear that. He values education very much." During the drive, Elena mentally reviewed the notes she had prepared for the meeting. She knew she would face resistance from some professionals, especially Dr. Laura, who made no secret of her discomfort with the presence of someone without a full degree on the team. Upon arriving at the mansion, Elena noticed an unfamiliar car parked at the main entrance. "Do we have visitors today?" she asked Paul as she got out of the vehicle. "Eleanor Sterling arrived from her trip last night," he replied in a low tone, as if sharing a secret. "Mr. Sterling's mother." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had already heard about the matriarch of the Sterling family through comments from Regina and other staff. She knew Eleanor was a strong-willed woman who maintained control over many aspects of the family's business, even after officially handing over command to her son. "Does she know about me?" Elena asked hesitantly. Paul shrugged. "Mr. Sterling must have mentioned it, but Mrs. Sterling doesn't usually get involved much in matters related to Leo, at least not directly." Elena nodded, thanked him, and headed to the side entrance she usually used. She preferred not to meet the matriarch on her first day. She walked through the well-tended gardens and entered through a discreet door that led directly to the wing where the therapy rooms and Leo's bedroom were located. Regina was waiting for her in the hallway with a worried expression. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted in a low voice. "The meeting has been moved to the library. Everyone is already there, including Mrs. Sterling." "Mr. Sterling's mother is attending?" Elena asked, feeling her anxiety rise. "She insisted," Regina replied with a significant look. "Be prepared, Elena. Mrs. Sterling can be challenging." With a sigh to gather courage, Elena followed Regina to the library, an imposing room on the ground floor, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with well-preserved books. In the center was a large oval table where several people were seated. She recognized Dr. Laura, Dr. Roberts, Leo's neurologist, and 2 other professionals she had briefly met. At the head of the table sat Arthur, and beside him, an elegant woman of about 70, with perfectly coiffed gray hair, an erect posture, and a severe expression. Her eyes, the same color as Arthur's, scrutinized Elena from head to toe as she entered the room. "Ah, Miss Vance, welcome," Arthur said, standing up. Punctual as always. Allow me to introduce you to my mother, Eleanor Sterling. Elena approached and extended her hand, striving to maintain her composure. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sterling, she said with a polite smile. Eleanor accepted the greeting with a brief, cold handshake. So, this is the young woman who has caused such a stir, she commented, her tone ambiguous as to whether this was good or bad. My son speaks highly of your innovative techniques. The way she pronounced innovative made her skepticism clear. I merely share what I've learned from my own brother, ma'am, Elena replied with humility. Nothing that replaces the work of the qualified professionals present here. Arthur indicated an empty chair. Please, Elena, join us. We were just discussing Leo's progress in recent weeks. Elena sat down, feeling the evaluative gazes of everyone in the room. Dr. Laura was flipping through a folder with notes, while Dr. Roberts consulted something on his tablet. As I was saying, Arthur continued, I've observed significant improvements, especially in Leo's eating and his willingness to engage in new activities. I believe Ms. Vance's approach has been a valuable complement to his treatment. With all due respect, Mr. Sterling, Dr. Laura interjected, we must be cautious when attributing progress to unstructured interventions. Children with autism spectrum disorder often exhibit natural variations in their behavior. I agree that we need to be scientific in our evaluations, Dr. Roberts said, but we also cannot ignore positive results, even if they come from less conventional approaches. Eleanor observed the debate with keen eyes, evaluating every word. All I'm interested in knowing, she said finally, directing her piercing gaze at Elena, is what exactly are your qualifications to treat a child with needs as complex as my grandson's? The room fell silent. Everyone seemed to be anxiously awaiting the answer. Mrs. Sterling, I don't pretend to treat Leo, Elena replied calmly. My role is to create an environment conducive to him feeling safe and understood, facilitating the work of the specialists. And where did you learn to do that? Eleanor insisted. Certainly not in the restaurant where you served tables. The condescending tone made Elena's face flush, but she maintained her composure. I studied psychology for 3 years at UCLA before I had to drop out, she explained. During that time, I focused on studies of child neurodevelopment, particularly autism, because of my brother. And yes, I also learned a lot in practice, both with him and with other cases I followed during volunteer internships. Arthur interjected, sensing the growing discomfort. Mother, I hired Elena precisely because she demonstrated a natural ability that complements the team's technical work, he explained. The results speak for themselves. Results that could be coincidental, Eleanor countered, or the result of the continuous work these professionals have been doing for years. If you'll permit me, Mrs. Sterling, Dr. Roberts spoke up. While it's too early for definitive conclusions, I have noticed changes in Leo's behavior that coincided with Ms. Vance's arrival. He's more receptive during our sessions, can maintain focus for longer periods, and has even shown interest in activities he previously rejected completely. Eleanor didn't seem convinced, but she leaned back in her chair, observing Elena intently. Well, let's see how long this miracle lasts, she finally commented. I've seen many revolutionary approaches come and go without leaving a lasting impact. The meeting continued for another hour, with each specialist presenting their reports and suggestions. Elena contributed modestly, always deferring to the professional's expertise, but firm in her observations about Leo's preferences and behavior patterns she had identified. When the session ended, everyone left except Arthur, Eleanor, and Elena. Ms. Vance, could you excuse us for a moment? Eleanor asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'd like to speak with my son privately. Of course, ma'am, Elena replied, standing up. Excuse me. She left the library, closing the door softly behind her. Although she knew she shouldn't, she lingered for a moment close enough to hear the raised voices that soon began to emerge from the room. Have you lost your mind, Arthur? Eleanor's voice was sharp, even at a low volume. Hiring an unqualified waitress to care for Leo? What will people think? I don't care what people think, Mother, Arthur replied firmly. I care about my son's well-being, and for the first time in years, I'm seeing real progress. Progress, or are you seeing what you want to see? Why has this pretty young woman piqued your interest? Elena felt her face burn. She hadn't expected that kind of insinuation. Don't be ridiculous. Arthur's voice sounded irritated. This is strictly professional. Elena has a gift for connecting with Leo. something none of the expensive specialists you so highly defend have managed to do. You barely know her, Arthur? Eleanor exclaimed. Have you checked her background? Do you know that she dropped out of college? Have you considered that she might just be interested in your money? Enough, Mother. Arthur's tone was definitive. I did all the necessary background checks before hiring her. And contrary to what you think, she even tried to refuse the salary I initially offered, saying it was excessive. Elena moved away from the door, feeling guilty for eavesdropping on the private conversation, and disturbed by what she had heard. She was walking down the hallway when Regina appeared, carrying a tray with juice and cookies. Oh dear, I was looking for you, the housekeeper said. I thought you might like a refreshment after the meeting. Leo is in the garden with Clara, the nanny. Perhaps you'd like to join them. Thank you, Regina, Elena replied with gratitude, both for the snack and the timely distraction. Following the housekeeper's suggestion, Elena headed to the back garden, a large, well-designed space with various activity areas adapted for Leo. She found the boy sitting on a bench under a leafy tree, flipping through a picture book, while Clara, a young woman of about 20, sat nearby, supervising discreetly. Good morning, Clara, Elena greeted. How is Leo today? He's very calm, the nanny replied with a smile. He woke up early, but he hasn't had any meltdowns yet. Elena approached slowly and sat on the other end of the bench, respecting Leo's personal space. Hi, Leo, she said softly. What a cool book you're looking at. The boy didn't respond verbally, but he slightly turned the book in her direction. It was a gesture that, for him, represented a huge social opening. They're dinosaurs, Elena commented with controlled enthusiasm. Do you like dinosaurs? Leo nodded almost imperceptibly, turning the page to show a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Clara watched the interaction with evident admiration. It's amazing how he responds to you, she commented in a low voice. Usually he completely ignores new people for weeks. I think it's because I don't force interaction, Elena explained as she continued to comment on the images Leo showed. I respect his time and his space. They spent almost half an hour like this, with Leo gradually moving closer until he was practically leaning against Elena's arm, something Clara mentioned she had never seen before. It was at that moment that Arthur appeared in the garden, still looking tense after the discussion with his mother. Seeing his son so comfortable in Elena's presence, however, his expression softened. Looks like they're having fun, he commented, approaching slowly so as not to disturb Leo. The boy briefly looked at his father but soon returned his attention to the book. Leo is showing me his favorite dinosaurs, Elena explained with a smile. He knows a lot about them. Arthur sat down in a nearby chair, observing the interaction with interest. He got that book for his 4th birthday, he said in a low voice, but he rarely allowed anyone to look at it with him. Elena noticed the contained emotion in Arthur's voice. It's an honor, then, she replied simply. Clara discreetly moved away, giving the three of them privacy. For a few minutes they remained in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the moment of calm and connection. I apologize for my mother's behavior in the meeting, Arthur said finally in a low tone so as not to distract Leo. She's extremely protective and suspicious by nature. You don't need to apologize, Elena replied. It's understandable that she worries about her grandson. Even so, the way she referred to you was inappropriate. Elena hesitated, wondering if she should reveal that she had overheard part of the private conversation. She decided it would be better to be honest. I must confess, I overheard a bit of your conversation, she admitted, feeling embarrassed. It wasn't intentional. I was already walking away, but Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. I'm sorry you heard that, he said. My mother has strong opinions and doesn't always filter them. She's right to be cautious, Elena acknowledged. In her place, I would also question hiring someone without formal credentials for such an important position. Arthur looked directly at her, his eyes conveying determination. You have something more important than diplomas, Elena. A genuine connection with my son, he said with conviction. And that, to me, is worth more than any academic degree. Before Elena could respond, her phone vibrated. She took it out of her pocket, and her expression changed when she saw the name on the screen. Dr. Evans, St. Jude's Hospital. I need to take this. If you'll excuse me, she said, standing up abruptly and moving a few steps away. Arthur observed with curiosity the sudden change in her demeanor. From a distance, he could see that the conversation seemed serious, with Elena occasionally running a hand over her face in a gesture of concern. When she returned a few minutes later, her expression was a mask of forced calm. "Is everything all right?" Arthur asked, genuinely concerned. "Yes, just a personal matter I need to resolve," she replied, trying to sound casual. "Mr. Sterling, would it be possible for me to leave a little earlier today? I promise to make up the time another day." "Of course, no problem," he agreed promptly. "Paul can take you wherever you need to go." "That's not necessary." "Thank you," Elena refused. "I prefer to go on my own." Arthur noticed that something was wrong but respected her privacy. "As you wish. Leo will have a session with the speech therapist this afternoon anyway." Elena said goodbye to Leo, promising to return the next day, and the boy, surprisingly, waved back, a small but significant gesture. As she left the mansion, Elena tried to organize her thoughts. The call from Dr. Evans had brought news she feared. Her brother Alex had suffered a relapse and was hospitalized again. The medications that stabilized his seizures were out of stock in the public health system, and the alternatives were not as effective. The doctor had called because he knew Elena always found a way to get the medicine, even when it wasn't readily available. The problem was that these medications were expensive, far beyond what she could afford with her previous salary. Even with the significant increase she had received working for the Sterlings, her first payment would only come at the end of the month. And there was the issue of her previous debt to the hospital, which she had been paying in small monthly installments. As she walked to the bus stop, Elena considered her options. She could ask Arthur for an advance, but that would mean revealing her personal situation, something she preferred to keep separate from her professional life. Besides, after Eleanor's questioning of her intentions, asking for money would only reinforce the matriarch's suspicions. Another option would be to turn to David, her ex-boyfriend, who had offered financial help when they broke up, driven by guilt for having cheated on her. But Elena had refused at the time, determined to solve her problems alone, and she didn't want to create a dependency now. The third alternative was the one that scared her the most, accepting the proposal that Dr. Evans had mentioned in the call, a private clinical study. They were recruiting participants to test a new medication for conditions similar to Alex's. The compensation was generous, enough to cover the medications for several months, but it would mean subjecting her brother to an experimental treatment, something that made her extremely apprehensive. As the bus approached, Elena made a temporary decision. She would use her savings to buy the most urgent medications and buy time to find a more permanent solution. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best she could do at the moment. What she didn't know was that her hasty departure and the mysterious call had piqued Eleanor Sterling's curiosity. The matriarch, who had observed the entire scene from the library window, had already instructed her personal assistant to find out more about Dr. Evans and St. Jude's Hospital, and more importantly, what connection Elena had with them.